الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن اهتدى بهداه أما بعد. So last week we covered a couple of masail and we spoke about taqleed, and we said that there is more or less a consensus on the obligation, not just permissibility, obligation of taqleed for the layman. And we said people are categorized into two: mujtahid or muqallid. Mujtahid or muqallid. And if you're not a mujtahid, you're a muqallid. And that doesn't mean that you're just like just like a student. That doesn't mean that the student of knowledge is at the same level as a layman who has no clue, never studied anything in the Sharia. It doesn't mean that a student of knowledge who studied for 20 years or 15 years is the same as the one who studied for 1 year or half a year. Big difference between the two. But as a general category, we have these two: either muqallid or mujtahid. Because the scholars say that the mujtahid is prohibited from making taqleed. Yeah, prohibited from making taqleed. This is what a large group of scholars say. And there are details in it where the scholars have some discussion. But as a general rule, the layman has to make taqleed, and the mujtahid doesn't make taqleed, or shouldn't make taqleed, without a good reason. طيب. So now we're on page 26, yeah? We're on page 26. The author says, وَفَقَهُ اللَّهِ, a Muslim being bound by the fatwa once he has acted upon it. The Muslim being bound by a fatwa once he's acted upon it. And in the second paragraph he says, the scholars have reported a consensus that he is bound to it once he has acted upon it, except when it is known that the verdict goes contrary to the legislated evidence. So, for example, if a muqallid is a Hanafi and he asks a Hanafi scholar about his marriage, is it valid without a wali or is it invalid? And this mujtahid says, this Hanafi scholar says, it's valid. It's valid according to our madhab, and therefore your nikah is valid. He cannot then turn around after a couple of months and say, you know what, I don't like this wife. And the majority of scholars don't consider this a valid contract anyway, because there was no wali, and therefore, sorry, we're not married in the first place. Once he has acted upon it, you can't go back on it after that. طيب, what if he has taken that fatwa from a mufti and wants to act upon it, and has decided to act upon it, but then wants to change his mind afterwards? That's where the scholars disagree, and the madhab of Ahmad is that if you take a fatwa from a scholar, then you have to act upon it. You have to act upon it, unless you have a good reason to go against it, such as you find out far more knowledgeable scholars give you a different answer, something of that sort. Otherwise, you need to ask. Also, another point to note is that the scholars mention, as Shaykh al-Buhuti mentions in his sharh of Al-Muntaha, if there is only one mufti that you can ask, you have to follow that mufti. It's wajib to follow him. So if we're in a place now where we only have one scholar, we have to ask that scholar. Yeah? We have to ask that mufti. There's no way out. And so this is of course not so much of a problem today, because communication is very easy. But if there's only one mufti you can ask, you're on a trip for example, and there's one scholar with you, you have to act with what he says. You have to act upon what he says, especially if it requires a fatwa right now. The following page he says, what does a Muslim do when the scholar changes his ijtihad on an issue? In the first point he says, in the middle of the paragraph, there is an established principle among the scholars, which is that one ijtihad does not invalidate another ijtihad. One ijtihad doesn't invalidate another ijtihad. So, the scholar has now given you a fatwa. Can you follow this fatwa? The answer is yes. Yeah, the answer is yes. And so therefore, acting upon that fatwa is fine. Yeah, acting upon that fatwa is fine. Even if the scholar mufti changes his opinion. Yeah? Unless he changes his opinion to something that is an ijma'. Okay. The following page, what opinion does a Muslim follow when muftis differ on an issue? The first principle that we have to know in this issue is following a mufti is permissible if he's qualified, even if there is someone more knowledgeable available. Yeah, is that clear? So we have two scholars in the country, for example. One is far more knowledgeable than the other, but both are qualified. Can we say you have to ask the more knowledgeable one? The answer is no. You can ask even the less knowledgeable one. You can ask even the less knowledgeable one. Even if there is a more knowledgeable one available. No doubt it's better to ask the more knowledgeable. But it's valid for you to ask anyone. Yeah, it's valid for you. And this is what the vast majority of scholars are on. That you can ask anyone. Yeah?
Sorry.
Yes.
Quick question on 2.4. This is just a bit that I'll quickly go getting. But just a quick question on 2.4 when it said the scholar changes his opinion. So, مثلا, the example that I took when we were looking at Sharh al-Mu'taymeen.
Yeah.
So Sharh al-Mu'taymeen had an opinion on menstruation, for example.
Yeah.
And then later on he changed his opinion on it. So Shaykh al-Mu'taymeen, you're saying that it's fine with him to take Shaykh al-Mu'taymeen's old opinion even though he wants to follow all of Shaykh al-Mu'taymeen's opinion, or should he change now his opinion too?
He doesn't have to change, but he can change. Like we said, if he hasn't acted upon it already, like the nikah with the wali issue, let's say this Hanafi mufti comes out and says, you know what, I know that earlier fatwa was the Hanafi madhab, but I'm going with the majority opinion now. He says, great, good for you, that's fine, but I've already acted upon the fatwa and therefore my marriage is still valid. Yeah, we can't say because he was the one I asked, my marriage is now invalid because of, that's done and dusted. But if I want to marry again, now I either ask him again for his new, and he'll give me his new opinion, or I ask someone else, whoever I trust. So in that case, on menstruation, for example, the woman has acted upon the menstruation ruling already. She wants to go with his new opinion, she can do.
She shouldn't go in a new month on his old opinion, or she can?
If there's another scholar who holds his position that she wants to, that she feels she can follow, then alhamdulillah, there's no issue. If she says no, I trust Shaykh ibn Uthaymin, I'm sticking to his fatwa, then for upcoming years, then she goes with his new opinion. Okay. What does he follow when the muftis differ on an issue? Just like a scholar has ijtihad, does a layman have ijtihad? He doesn't have ijtihad in the sharia the same way a scholar has ijtihad, but he has his own ijtihad, because ijtihad just means putting in an effort to come to a conclusion. So his ijtihad is to find these scholars. Is he qualified? Is he not qualified? If the scholars now, like we said, if you've asked the mufti or you've decided to follow a particular madhab, that's it, you're done and dusted. You can hear all the difference of opinion in the world. It doesn't have an effect on you at all. But sometimes, without asking anyone in the first place, we know that two opinions exist already, because we hear it all the time. Now it's my turn to act. What do I do? There are two opinions. I know that this scholar holds this opinion. I know this scholar holds this opinion. This one says it's haram. This one says it's permissible. Yeah. Let's take this student loan example in the UK. Before even entering university, I hear about this difference of opinion. I hear that Shaykh Haytham al-Haddad says it's allowed. I hear that some other scholars said it's not allowed, and I know it already. But I've never been bothered about it because I've never needed a student loan. But now I'm thinking about taking one. I want to enter university. What do I do? Here, the author then mentions a couple of points. He says in the second paragraph, he has to distinguish one opinion over the other as his belief in the correctness of the opinion is stronger when it is issued by a scholar who possesses more knowledge and a greater level of wara. So he goes, if he's unsure, he goes with the opinion of the scholar who he thinks is more knowledgeable and more pious. Yeah? Now, before he knew about the difference of opinion, did he have to look for the more knowledgeable and more pious scholar? He didn't have to. Didn't have to bother. He could ask anyone. But now he's aware of these opinions. I know 100% sure Shaykh Haytham says this, and I know 100% sure this other Shaykh says this. He says it's allowed, he says it's haram. And I haven't asked yet. What do I do? There's no point me going to this person and asking him, because I know what his fatwa is. There's no point me going to this one, because I know what his fatwa is. Because he spread it online and whatever. So what do I do? Here is when we have to do a bit of ijtihad. Who is more worthy of follow? Yeah, who's more worthy of follow? And you go for the most knowledgeable and the most pious scholar. Because now we have to keep in mind that our intention as Muslims is to follow the law of Allah. To follow the law of Allah. On many issues of ijtihad the scholars disagree on, it's not easy to distinguish. And like I said last week, a layman can easily be deceived. Sounds like a strong opinion, but then he hears another opinion, and that sounds like a strong opinion. Okay? And so, what does he do in this case? He tries to find the most knowledgeable and the most pious scholar. That's the first point. Or another way of making ijtihad to know what's more likely to be closer to what Allah wants is, this is a principle to keep in mind. What is most likely what Allah wants? That's what I want to do. That's what I'm looking for. I'm not asking his mufti because he's anything special in and of himself. I'm asking him because he is more likely to tell me what Allah wants from me. So this is our intention when asking for a fatwa. What is it that Allah wants from us? If I go for someone more knowledgeable and more experienced and more pious, more likely he is going to say and tell me what Allah wants. More likely. If we have 10 scholars, 8 of them say one thing, 2 of them say another thing. Which is more likely what Allah wants from me? The majority opinion, yeah? More likely. The majority opinion. So I'm also making, as a layman, making ijtihad to find out what is more likely what Allah wants from me to do. And there are ways of doing it by looking at who the scholars are who hold the opinion, by looking at number, okay, by looking at madhahib also, especially on issues that have already been done and dusted. Like I said last week, it's very important to distinguish between 2 things. What were those 2 things? 2 types of fatwa: contemporary and done and dusted issues. Issues done and dusted, shouldn't be a problem at all. Shouldn't be a problem. They're there, everyone knows them, they're in the books, they've been spoken about, explained. That's it, it's finished. Yeah? Issues of worship, especially. Issues of character, adab, and so on. These aren't a problem at all. Any of the 4 madhahib, that's it. Any of these 4 madhahib, or I go with the majority opinion, that's it. It's finished. Can a woman recite Quran when she's on her menstrual cycle or not? Scholars disagree. So this woman does what? She makes ijtihad. What's more likely what Allah wants from me? Most scholars say she's not allowed to. Imam Malik says she is allowed to. Well, I've been following Malik for all the other fatwa, so I'm just going to stick to Malik. No problem. No problem. Okay, you're following. Because now she's not going for Malik because it's an easier opinion here, but because she's been following the madhab of Malik for a while. Or she says, I don't follow any particular madhab, I'm just following any scholar, and I heard the majority say it's not allowed, so therefore this is more likely what Allah wants from me, and so on. So these are various ways of going about it. If a person has some ability to look into evidences and so on, there's no issue as well. Yeah? Especially students of knowledge who have studied hadith and the Quran and fiqh for a while, then this is another way of finding out. Let's look at some of the books of fiqh. These scholars say this, these are their evidences. These scholars say this, these are their evidences. I feel more comfortable with these evidences. No problem. No problem. Again, there's no issue doing it. Yeah.
If you follow a madhab and there's an issue that the student know, all the scholars of the madhab now, when you ask them, they say it's not allowed.
Yeah.
You still take the opinion of Shaykh Haytham.
For a good reason, yes. For a good reason, yes. But if you say, I'm always following this madhab, but all of them say it's haram. I'm always following this madhab, but all of them say the student loan is haram. You know what? I'll just go with Shaykh Haytham's opinion. Here we're going for his opinion because it's easier. Okay, so there's no other reason why I'm following his opinion, only because it's a rukhsah. Makes life easier for me, let me go with it. But if I say, you know what? Sheikh Haytham is, in my opinion, more knowledgeable than some of these other scholars. Or there are reasons why I'm going to follow his fatwa on this issue over the scholars of my madhab on this issue. Such as he's looked into the issue for a lot longer. He's done more research into it. He's more trustworthy, in my opinion, and so on. So if you have a good reason to go with, that opinion, there's no problem. There's no issue there. Okay. So we're on page 28. What opinion does a Muslim follow when muftis differ on an issue? Like we said before, there are two circumstances. Either you have no clue about this issue in the first place. You don't know about this issue in the first place. But it's arisen now. I'm starting to go to university. I'm about to go to university. So I need to look into the student loan. What should I do? I ask a scholar, any qualified scholar. He says it's allowed. What can I do? Follow it? Can I follow it? Yes, automatically. That's scenario number one. Scenario number two. I don't want to go to university, but I've been hearing about this student loan debate. And I've heard that some scholars say it's allowed and some scholars say it's not allowed. 1 year later, I do want to go to university. I already know the difference of opinion. There's no point in me going to ask a mufti because I already know what Shaykh Haytham's fatwa is and I already know what this scholar's fatwa is. So I already know about the difference of opinion. Now it's a different scenario. Do you understand the difference between the two scenarios? One, I can ask absolutely any qualified person. Any qualified person. Because I don't know what their opinions are. I don't know what their opinions are in the first place. The second scenario, I know what the opinions are in the first place. I already know what the opinions are. After knowing what the opinions are, I want to act upon it. It happens that next year, the year after, whatever, I want to act upon it. Now what do I do? Do we say ask anyone you trust? What do? You're going to be confused. This guy says this guy says this. There's no point going to him because I know what his opinion is. There's no point going to him because I know what his opinion is. Here is where the layman makes his own personal ijtihad. By who is more knowledgeable? Who is more pious? What's the majority opinion? They're able to, if they can, look into evidences, even though that comes at a later stage, because like we said last week, it can easily be deceptive. Yeah? And that's why a person who is astonishingly unqualified can make a video, especially if they have lots of followers and they're famous, and they can talk about as many evidence as they want. Those who watch that video and are lay people, what are they going to think? You see it. You see it now. You see some unqualified people speak about big issues, and you'll have the comments, YouTube comments, Facebook comments. MashaAllah, can't believe anyone goes against this. Like what I said last week. Ibn al-Qayyim in A'lam al-Waqi'in writes, this is one opinion, these are their proofs. And the reader says, no one can go against this. Same thing here. So sometimes a person thinks that that's it, I have the evidences. Okay, well, if these evidences are clear, this comes at a later stage for when asking for a fatwa. Especially someone who hasn't studied evidence, hasn't studied fiqh, or usul al-fiqh, or hadith, or Quran. All of these things, once studied, once delved into, once perfected, we can say, even if you're not a mujtahid, you look into the proofs of the various scholars and you're free to follow an opinion, as you wish. There's no issue there. There's no issue. So, contrary to what some people believe, who think if you are in favor of the madhahib, it means you hate evidences. You don't like proofs. We don't like evidence, just follow the scholars. That's not the case at all. But we are addressing certain types of people. You're addressing lay people and telling them look into evidences. That's what the problem is. Yeah, that's what the problem is. As for people qualified, then it's encouraged to look into evidences. Yeah? And now a lot of our mashayikh who are Hanbalis and who oppose this mentality of going against the madhahib and learning according to other than the madhahib, after a few years of study with them, they push you into evidences. And if you don't know the evidences of an issue, they're not happy about it. Okay? So, massive difference between the 2 points.
Quick question in terms
Yes.
of as laymen picking an opinion. I know that there's especially the ulama, they have concept of making things difficult on themselves. taking the safer opinion. But also, the hadith of submission is easy. So
Yeah.
in terms of when we try and sometimes make things, is it good to try and make things difficult for ourselves in the sense of choosing the harder opinion, or not?
The author brings this point up later and says that it's good to try to avoid difference of opinion. How do you avoid difference of opinion? Let's say, for example, a woman who's on her menstrual cycle isn't allowed to recite the Quran, according to the majority of scholars. But she can, according to Imam Malik. So she says, you know what? I will hold the Mus'haf, in that case, or read from my mobile, but I won't recite. I'll just look with my eyes. Here, she hasn't opposed any of the scholars. She hasn't opposed any of the scholars. So she has now moved away from the difference of opinion. She's not in a place of difference of opinion now. She's done something permissible by ijma'. As far as I know, I don't know of a scholar who prohibits looking into the Mus'haf whilst on menstrual cycle. Yeah? So that's what, the author says that later, and it's a recommended thing. It's a recommended thing to try to avoid difference of opinion. Yeah. It's a tough issue because sometimes the difference of opinion is weak, but people don't realize it's weak. So they say, just in case. Why just in case? Well, why? In this case, there shouldn't need to be a just in case because the difference of opinion is so weak. Those who say such and such a thing is haram, for example, it's not really a relied upon opinion. It's a weak opinion. Okay, so that comes with boundaries. So it can be a difficult topic sometimes. But yes, as a general idea, it is good to avoid difference of opinion. دع ما يريبك إلى ما لا يريبك. Leave what you are not sure of and go with what you're sure of. Okay, so we're on page 28, and the author here gives us a couple of ways of knowing who to follow if scholars disagree. Just look at here paragraph number 4 on page 28. He says a Muslim is required to follow the legislation of Allah. A Muslim is required to follow the legislation. And we emphasized on this point. When asking for a fatwa, this is the intention of the questioner. I am here to know what Allah's legislation is. Not your legislation, Allah's legislation. So I need to take certain steps that help me reach Allah's legislation. By asking the more knowledgeable, I'm more likely going to reach Allah's legislation. By asking the majority opinion, I'm more likely going to reach Allah's legislation. Okay, and so on. Yeah? If I have some form of level of study and understanding, then I can also look into the evidences of the various scholars. And via that, know what's more likely Allah's legislation. Okay? And that stage ideally comes when a teacher tells you, okay, now you need to start focusing on learning evidence and difference of opinion in the scholars and so on. When a teacher tells you you're at this stage, then this is one of the strong ways of knowing whether to act upon this or whether to act upon this. Remember we said, for those who came in late again, repeat this point one more time and we'll move on. If you are unaware of an issue and you're faced with it, I'm traveling, for example, and I want to know, can I combine Salah, Dhuhr and Asr, or can I not combine? What do I do? Huh? Ask who? Anyone.
Someone who is known to be present.
So someone who's qualified?
Yes.
Anyone who's qualified?
Someone you trust.
Okay, qualified, so you have to trust them, etc., etc. All these things, they're qualified. We've established they're qualified.
Yeah.
Anyone qualified?
No, specifically.
Huh? Okay, qualified in Fettah?
Yeah.
Yes, anyone qualified. طيب, that's one scenario. However, I hear of the difference of opinion. In the Hanafi school, you can't combine Salah. The majority say you can't combine Salah. Then, after learning of this difference of opinion, I travel. Here is a different scenario. I don't need to ask anyone, do I? Because I know what their opinions are. I know the Hanafi school says this, and the majority say this. Now what do I do? This is where this page applies. Okay? This is because last week we said, ask anyone. And there's no issue at all. Any madhab, any qualified scholar, no problem. Here, this page refers to the scenario I've just spoken about now. I already know the opinions. And now I want to act upon it. Now what do? Go for the most knowledgeable. Not sure who's most knowledgeable. How am I going to know whether Malik or Ahmad's more knowledgeable? Go for the majority. That's another way of knowing whether Allah prefers this or doesn't prefer this. Okay, majority say it's allowed. Bismillah, let's go with it. Okay. Following page.
Read the one where it says result of the strength of evidence presented.
Sorry?
The last part, very last
Yeah,
part.
yeah.
Isn't it as some people have a misconception, for example, if they read an argument made by the one side
Yeah.
and they didn't read the argument to the other side, they'll think that the one side is right.
Like we said last week, for someone who's not at that stage in knowledge, and that means a couple of years of fiqh, and a couple of years of hadith, a couple of years of usul al-fiqh, if one isn't at that stage, they'll be easily deceived by this evidence issue. Because they just have to hear one side and their proofs and they'll be convinced. They'll be convinced. How is a layman going to question the evidences of a scholar? A scholar is telling you, here's the proof, here's the proof, here's the proof. Which layman is going to come say, no, Al-Hakim weakened this hadith? He doesn't have a clue. He said it's authentic, okay, it's authentic. Okay. He said his verse means this, the most companions say this, okay. How is he going to respond and say, actually Ibn Abdul Bar says most companions don't say this? Or he can't respond. And so this evidence one, he mentioned last because it is for a certain type of people. It's permissible for a layman, however. Yes, permissible for a layman. It is permissible. So, for example, let's take the example of breaking your fast, which is a nafil. Breaking the fast, which is a nafil. Okay, and we'll come on to it later in the text. I'm fasting, and I want to break my fast. According to Malik and Abu Hanifa, it's haram to break your fast. Because you can't start an act of worship and invalidate it. Ahmad and Shafi'i allow you to do that. I'm a Hanafi. But I've come across a few ahadith that say you can break your fast. Can I go based on the following of those ahadith? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. We're not saying it's haram. Yeah? Big difference between saying it's haram and saying it's wajib. We're not saying it's haram, but we invalidate the opinion that says it's wajib. Some people will tell you, if you're a Hanafi and you come across a hadith that says you can't break your fast, you have to act upon that hadith. Absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. This Hanafi can read these ahadith and say, okay, fine, that's the evidences. We have a whole madhab here, consisting of thousands of scholars. They're not going to, sit and just ignore evidences for the sake of it. They'll have their own responses and answers and evidences and so on. I'm going to stick to my Hanafi madhab. No problem. Or you can say, you know what? I usually don't want to go against my madhab, but I'm struggling to go against this hadith. So let me just go with this hadith. It's allowed. It is allowed without an issue. And the Hanbalis say it's allowed. Ibn Salah explicitly says it's allowed. There's no problem. So long as there is a scholar, a mujtahid, who goes with that hadith, who acts upon that hadith. Yeah? So I read this hadith, and I read that a Shafi'i acts upon this hadith. No issue. Oppose your madhab, go with the Shafi'i, only because of that hadith. Because I don't feel comfortable opposing this hadith. No issue. Of course, this issue here, you can leave the difference of opinion altogether and just say, I won't break the fast, because I don't have to break my fast. But there are issues where you have to go with an opinion. For example, fasting the 30th of Sha'ban. Fasting the 30th of Sha'ban, if the moon isn't sighted, and there are clouds, or it's foggy and so on, and it's impossible to sight. The majority of scholars say, if you don't sight the moon, it is haram to fast. You don't fast, because it's not Ramadan. The Hanabila say it's wajib to fast. It's wajib to fast. Yeah? They say it's wajib to fast. So, I'm here, I'm a Hanbali. I'm between the madhab, I'm between the majority of scholars. The madhab says I have to fast. Most scholars say I have to not fast. Now there's an actual conflict. Now I can't say avoid the difference of opinion. There's no way. You either go with this or you go with this. In this case, I can either say, I'm a Hanbali, alhamdulillah. The scholars are agreed that the four madhahib are permitted to be followed. I'm going to stick to my madhab. Is that allowed? Answer is yes. Or, there is a clear-cut hadith that says, فَإِنْ غُمَّ عَلَيْكُمْ فَأَكْمِلُوا عِدَّةَ شَعْبَانَ 30. If it is unclear to you, the citing is unclear, then continue Sha'ban for 30 days. How can we oppose this hadith? Obvious hadith. Of course, like we said, these long discussion between the scholars on these issues. But for me, in this case, I don't see how I can go against the hadith. I don't feel comfortable sticking to the madhab. I'm going to go with the majority of scholars because of this hadith, which seems clear to me. Permissible? Permissible. Permissible. Okay? But what we don't want is, this hadith seems clear to me, I'm going to follow it because I believe it's more likely what Allah wants. No issue. But what we don't want is, why are you acting upon the Hanbali madhab? Can't you see the hadith? No. You go with the hadith and the majority of scholars for you. For you. As for enforcing it on others, there's no way. There's no way. Would you have enforced it on Ibn Umar? He used to go with this opinion? No. Would you have enforced it on Ahmed? No. So, we distinguish between those two issues. Who does a Muslim ask when there are numerous muftis? According to the majority view, when there are numerous scholars who issue religious verdicts, it is allowed for a Muslim to ask any one of them. Is that issue clear? Very clear. This is when you want a fatwa. The page before was when you already know the fatwa, and now you want to act upon it. Here you don't know the fatwa, and you want to act upon it. Who do we follow? That's your summary. That first sentence is a summary of the whole thing. We don't have to read everything. Next page. What does a Muslim do if he cannot find a mufti to ask? The scholars talk about this issue. He fears Allah to the best of his ability, or he takes the ruling before legislation, which means it's permissible. Whatever you want to do is permissible. I don't have a mufti to ask, is this meat allowed or is it not allowed? I want to eat a shark, for example, but there's no scholar to ask. I don't have what do I do? Some scholars say everything is allowed, unless something prohibits. So he says, Bismillah, I'm going to go ahead with it. Or he fears Allah to the best of his ability. Alhamdulillah, as the author says, this issue is extremely rare in contemporary times. 2.8, is it allowed for a Muslim to follow a mufti who is lenient? And the author says it is haram for a Muslim to act on the verdict of a mujtahid who he knows is mutasahid, is overly lenient. Overly lenient. And this is all explicitly stated by Sheikh Mansour al-Buhuti in Sharh al-Muntaha, that it is haram to follow a mufti who is lenient. So this is the Hanbali madhab, and I don't know of a khilaf in it. That it's haram to follow a scholar who is overly lenient. It's haram to follow a scholar who's overly lenient. How do you know someone who's overly lenient? Someone who's overly lenient is someone who you almost don't even have to ask them for a ruling. You'll know they're going to say it's allowed. Yeah? Someone who claims to be a mufti, but every one of his opinions is halal. Everything is allowed. And he sometimes opposes the ijma' of the scholars. And on a consistent basis opposes the four madhahib with his easy opinions. And consistently opposes the vast majority of scholars with his easy opinions. And consistently has no response to clear verses and ahadith except the religion is ease. No scholar speaks like that. Every madhab has strict opinions and lenient opinions. Every madhab. Every scholar has strict opinions and lenient opinions. So if you come along and your opinions are all lenient, that means there's a problem. It means you're not following the path of the scholars. You can't say everything is allowed. And when a scholar, all the madhahib will sometimes be on the side of the majority and sometimes be against the majority. Every madhab has mufradat. Every madhab has rulings which oppose the majority. Yeah, sometimes. And every madhab has rulings which is in accordance with the majority. But if you're always against the majority, or always against the consensus almost, it means there's a problem. Okay, it means there's a problem. So following the fatwa of someone who's constantly overly lenient, there's a problem there. Yeah, there's a problem there. Okay.
If you don't take them out of they wouldn't be allowed to give fatwas if they were overly lenient.
I mean, of course, in an Islamic country where there is where there used to be an authority that looks over muftis and appoints muftis, then they wouldn't be allowed to give fatwa. They wouldn't be appointed as a mufti in the first place. But the time that we're in, anyone can speak, even someone who's not qualified, let alone someone who's qualified and lenient. So it's for us to be careful. For example, there are some who give fatwa. They've gone for the madhab of al-Shafi'i that shaving the beard is okay. They've gone for a really, really, really rare opinion in the depths of the oceans of the Hanafi madhab, that you can break your fast when it is when the sun rises. That's when the end of suhoor is. And when it comes to traveling, you can shorten your prayer whenever you feel like. And the woman doesn't have to cover her face. And the woman doesn't have to travel with a mahram. And so on, and this, and that. Which madhab are you following? Which scholars are you giving fatwa according to? None of the scholars of the ummah have gathered all these opinions together. No one. It's just you. So this is another form of opposing ijma'. Those who say, for example, that shortening the prayer can be done, any travel, anything that you call travel, say that covering the face is wajib. And a woman has to travel with a mahram. Those who say this have another strict opinion. Those who say this lenient opinion have a strict opinion somewhere else. But to have only lenient opinions, here there's a problem. Here there's a problem. Okay? And we don't judge lenient opinions according to strict scholars at the same time. Just like someone can be overly lenient, someone can be overly strict. And the one who's overly strict is also opposing the sunnah of the scholars. Because none of the scholars were strict on every single issue. They all have lenient opinions at times. Why? Because their concern is, what does Allah want from us? If what Allah wants from us is slightly stricter than what many people would like, then so be it. If what Allah wants from us is slightly more lenient than what we expected, then so be it. Alhamdulillah. But for everything to be strict, everything's haram, or everything is allowed, there's an issue. Yeah, there's an issue there.
You go back to 2.7.
Yeah.
He said it's very extremely rare, but nowadays people, instead of, like the example he gave of phoning someone, people don't phone scholars anymore, they so type it online. So how would you go about going through fatwa websites, because most of the time you're not asking the question yourself, you're just looking for a question that coincides with your question.
Yeah.
Is that permissible as well?
So like we said, on issues that really require a contemporary fatwa, that's the issue of concern. As for old issues, I can go on Islam Kuwait quickly. How do I pray witr? No issue. Go. You get a valid fatwa there, no problem. Islam web, valid fatwa, no issue. How do I pray Qiyam al-Layl? Can I do this? These issues of ibadat, done and dusted, spoken about by the scholars, not a problem. Contemporary issues require direct fatwa. You can't rely on Islam QA. You can't rely on Islam web for contemporary issues, especially the ones that concern in the UK. Like the one who asked for a ruling on the student loan in the UK to Sheikh Salih al-Munajjad on Islam QA. No. Unless you have written out a whole essay on exactly how the loan works, and the Shaykh responded with an answer, then that would be fine. No problem.
Is that all contemporary issues, or just specific ones that need a specific time, a specific location?
What do you mean?
There's certain, like, for example, medical issues or other issues that maybe are sort of, they don't require you to be in a certain location.
Yeah.
So would those be permissible to look up?
There are no issues. But there are issues where there are certain issues that really do require the mufti to be present in that country. As the Shaykh Abdul Rahman al-Sa'di says, you shouldn't ask scholars other than those in your country. You shouldn't ask scholars other, because if it's an issue of the past, then they know what they have is also what the scholar in India, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia has. It's the same thing. They might have slight difference of opinion, but both are valid. And if it's a contemporary issue, then he is more worthy of being asked than the other scholar. So, yes, when it comes to these sort of contemporary issues, then you need direct contact if it's okay. And if you can ask someone from here, it's even better. طيب, let's move on. 2.9. What's the verdict of a Muslim following all the scholars' concessions? According to the scholarly consensus, it is prohibited for a Muslim to look for and follow the compromises and concessions of the scholars. And the scholars used to say, the one who takes with the lenient opinions of every madhab is a fasiq. Is a fasiq. Yeah? Is a fasiq. A seriously sinful person. Or a corrupt individual. So there's no doubt that's haram. That's a clear issue, yeah? I want to do something. I remember someone saying there's an opinion that says it's halal. Let me go with that. He says it's halal, so let me go with this here. He says this issue, it's halal, let me go with that. So whatever makes life easy for you, you just go with that. That's prohibited by ijma'. No difference of opinion that it's haram. Any issue there? No. Page 36. Does a Muslim have to follow a specific madhab? There is almost a consensus that following one of the four madhahib is permissible. And therefore, and there is also, the majority of scholars do not consider it obligatory to follow one of the four madhahib. And this is the Hanbali madhab, as stated by Al-Mirdawi and those before him. And it's also the Shafi'i madhab. And as far as I know, it's the madhab of the four imams. That it's not obligatory. It's the madhab of the four imams that it's not obligatory to follow one particular madhab. Even the Hanafi madhab. And I asked a couple of Hanafi mashayikh and they said the same thing. They said it is not wajib to follow the Hanafi madhab in every single issue. And as Ibn Abidin al-Hanafi rahimahullah says in his Hashiyah, madhabu al-ammi madhabu mufti. The madhab of the layman is the madhab of who? His mufti. The madhab of the layman is the madhab of his mufti. So you can't obligate following a particular madhab. There was an era where some scholars obligated the following of a madhab. They said it is haram for you in North Africa to go against the madhab of Malik. It is haram for you in the subcontinent to go against the madhab of Abu Hanifa. There was a phase for that. Why? Because they said, look, if we're opening the door up for anyone to give fatwa, we're going to be in trouble. Yeah? And the nature of people is ease. They want ease. They want life to be easy for them. And so if we don't shut the door, cut off that path from the beginning, it will open up the path for everyone to say what they wish and people to follow what they want. This guy's following this guy's following this, it causes fitna and so on. So because of that, this fatwa was given at a certain time. And many scholars are narrated to have said, I never give fatwa according to other than the madhab. This scholar might have his own personal opinion, but he won't give fatwa according to other than the madhab. This was very common, very common. But the point is, especially in our time now, it's very, very difficult to say following a madhab is wajib. Following one particular madhab is wajib. When I say following one particular madhab, we're saying you stick to it, you have to stick to it, and it's haram for you to go against it, with any issue. That's very difficult to say now. Very difficult. And like I said, as far as I know, the four imams are against that. He says here, the majority of scholars in the second paragraph are of the view that it is impermissible to do so. Impermissible to follow a specific madhab. Because he does not know the statements or terminology of the madhab. Therefore, it is an obligation on him to ask one of the available muftis for religious verdict. Right as a note, rather, the majority of scholars are of the view that it is permissible. Unless the Shaykh, wafaqahullah, means the layman cannot, and this is most likely what he's referring to, because he said here, he doesn't know the statements or terminology of the madhab. Unless he means, you can't follow a madhab's books as a layman. I'm a Hanafi, I'm sorted. I just take Hashiyat ibn Abidin, got it at home, any issue, Bismillah, open it up and let's find it. Here, the author says, no, you cannot do that. Because even a student of knowledge who has studied the Hanbali madhab for 10 years will have sometimes difficulty studying a Hanafi book. Because the terminologies are very different sometimes. Yeah, their ways of usage of words can be different. So how in the world is a layman gonna rely on these books? So if we're talking books, then we have a case. But if we're talking, you're not allowed to follow a particular madhab. Even if you ask a scholar who follows that madhab, then that's highly questionable. Highly questionable. Yeah? And only Shawkani and Ibn Hazm and a group of others who followed them go with that opinion. Okay. Otherwise, the four madhahib are agreed, and it's almost an ijma' that you are allowed to follow one madhab in every single issue. If we said earlier you can make taqleed of a scholar on every issue, what's the difference between making taqleed of two different scholars and one scholar? Why do you say you're allowed to ask a certain mufti all the time? He's my local mufti, for example. He's my local mufti. Any issue, I ask him. How is that different to asking for the Hanafi madhab every time? Or the Hanbali madhab? There's no difference whatsoever. Yeah, there's no difference whatsoever. So this point here of majority of scholars, that either is referring to the books, you don't go for books, just taking rulings from books, or otherwise it's questionable, unless he means something different by it. And in his other books, as far as I know, he stated that the majority of scholars say that following madhab is permissible. Yeah, so this point here, a note needs to be put next to it. He also continues and says, a person may say, contemporary scholars continue to author works on the four madhahib. So what is then the benefit of all works of fiqh on a particular madhab if it is not compulsory on a Muslim to act on it, and rather it's compulsory on him to ask the mufti of his time? He says, if you can't follow these books of fiqh, or the madhahib, if you can't follow these madhahib, then why are the scholars writing these books? He says, I say, the aim of these books is to teach people they're not authored to practice what is in them. So they're important books whose significance is in helping to understand the words of Allah and to learn how to comprehend the various fiqh issues. And again, Allah knows best, that's also a questionable issue. Because the scholars do write them for acting upon. The scholars do write them for acting upon. And again, because what's fiqh? Fiqh is learning the rulings that you act upon. So what are we studying then? If we're not acting upon, what are we studying? I'm going to spend 10 years. Some of our teachers say, learn the Hanbali madhab for 6 years. When you've perfected it for 6 years, then you move on to difference of opinion. I'm going to sit there for 6 years learning fiqh, not acting upon it. Of course it's there to act upon it. There's no doubt it's there to act upon it. The books of fiqh are there to act upon it, but if you come across an issue, you need a mufti. Yeah? So again, there's no harm in me studying the Hanbali madhab from Hanbali books. For example, Babu Sifati Salah, the chapter of prayer. What do? Can I act upon this chapter? Of course I can act upon the chapter. It says when a person stands for Salah, raises his hands, places his hands below the navel, then recites the istiftah, then isti'adah, then basmalah. These are there to be acted upon. However, like we said, always ask a human being rather than referring to websites and books and so on, because the human being can see you and your circumstance, knows what you're asking about, etc. Another point to note is that the madhahib sometimes have opinions that are no longer acted upon today. Yeah? And that's most likely where the shaykh is coming from. That's more likely where the shaykh is. Otherwise, the shaykh is always teaching Hanbali books. He himself has taught Mukhtasar al-Khiraqi, Umdat al-Fiqh, Zahed al-Mustaqni, Umdat al-Talib, if I'm not mistaken, as well. All of these are Hanbali books. So if he's teaching people just semantics, that's impossible. So he must be teaching people how to pray, how to fast, how to pray. So he's teaching these books for people to act upon. But there are issues that require a fatwa. So yes, what the author is referring to here is, so when I say it's highly questionable, it means taking it as a general statement is problematic. Otherwise, to say there are some exceptions where you can't act upon a certain madhab, that's true. There are some issues in the books of fiqh, there are opinions of a madhab that are no longer acted upon. And you'll see this in the books of fiqh themselves. So a lot of the teachers, for example, they teach a Hanbali book in fiqh, and they say, here's the ruling, here's the ruling, here's the ruling, here's the Hanbali madhab. Footnote, and the second narration in the madhab is this: وَعَلَيْهِ الْعَمَلُ وَعَلَيْهِ الْفَتْوَى, and the action is upon this second narration today. And the fatwa is upon the second narration today. I.e., we no longer go with the madhab. We no longer go with the madhab. For example, in the book of Qada, the book of, what's the word? Judgments, the book of the judiciary. Yeah? There are conditions for a qadi, a judge. There are certain conditions in the Hanbali madhab and the majority of scholars that must be ticked for a person to be a qualified judge. The Hanbalis now are almost agreed that those conditions are no longer applicable. Because they say if we had those conditions today, no one would be a judge today. And no one would be a mufti today. And all the Hanbalis, the later Hanbalis, now go with the opinion of Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, which is the qualified judge or the qualified mufti is dependent on the time and place. Dependent on time and place. Maybe this judge is qualified in this place, unqualified in that place. Qualified now, unqualified 300 years ago. Yeah? So, this goes back to your question last week about maybe we don't have qualified people, so who do we ask? Yeah, here it is. Standards drop with time, and standards might be raised with time, unlikely to be raised, but standards drop as time goes. Yeah, and so someone who wasn't a mufti before, probably we're going to have to resort to him now, even if the standards are slightly lower. So these are some of the issues that can arise with the books of fiqh. So here's why there is, why the author is saying you need to ask a scholar, because of these issues. Yeah. As for understanding the text of the Shaykh to mean, it's haram, that's the, that's the apparent meaning of his words. It's impermissible. It's haram to follow a madhab. Unlikely. Yeah? Haram to follow the books of a madhab like that, yes. Perhaps you have a case because of what we just spoke about. Also, these books aren't there to act upon. Again, to take that apparently in a general way is impossible. Of course they're there to be acted upon. But when a person wants a particular fatwa, a person needs to refer back to a scholar. Yes.
Maybe because obviously it's an English translation of the Arabic text.
Yeah.
You read that, is the Arabic text maybe some of those?
It could well be. It's a good point.
These 2 points.
I've got the text here.
Just got to look at that. You need to talk
Yeah.
about the standards of time.
Yeah.
Is it also standards of place as well? Like, for example,
Same thing. Yeah. So now, for example, someone unqualified in Saudi Arabia because of so many scholars will be qualified here. And I recall one of the Sheikh Muhammad Mukhtar al-Shanqiti, just as a side benefit, he said, I studied with my father full time. Studied with my father full time for 10 years. And some people came to him and said, Sheikh, you've been studying for a long time now. Give us classes. People need you to teach them. And you're sinful because people need you to teach and you're just sitting there learning. So he went back to his dad and said, this is what these people are saying. He said, they're liars. Don't go out to teach until I tell you. Don't go out to teach until I tell you. He said, when I spent 15 years of studying, when I say studying, it's not studying at university from 7 till Dhuhr time, and then the rest of the day is chilling out. He is with his dad 24/7. Morning, evening, acts with him, eats with him, drinks with him, lives with him, in his classes, and so on. 15 years. After 15 years, he said, now go and teach. Now go and teach if you wish. So, a lot of the brothers here in the UK, when one of the mashayikh came over, we asked him this question. We said, 15 years of full-time study, so who's going to teach in the UK? And he said, where was the Shaykh Muhammad Mukhtar al-Shanqiti? Where does he live? Medina. In Medina, everywhere you look, there's a chair in the Prophet's masjid. Someone teaching. Chair of fiqh there. Sheikh Al-Muhsin is here. Sheikh Salih Al-Usaymi has come over today. Sheikh Al-Karim Al-Khudayr is here today. Sheikh Al-Hadithi is here. This Sheikh is there. Walk a bit further, another Sheikh. English gathering, Urdu gathering, Malaysian gathering, Pakistani gathering. There are teachers everywhere. So he said it's understandable here. Because he's not needed. Yeah, he's not needed. So he's better off waiting till he's 100% qualified. If we apply the same thing here in Birmingham, who's going to teach? And so he advised these students and said, look, you just teach what you can. If you've learned something and you're sure about it, teach it. Yeah, teach it. And don't wait to be as qualified as Sheikh Muhammad, because he's in a certain place and you're in a certain place. He's in a certain environment, you're in a certain environment. So, yes, it can differ from time to time.
Is there a balance to that? Because a lot
Of course.
the YouTube
This is the difficulty. So, at the one end, we have conditions that we want to be applied. And at the other end, we have people who are rushing too much. So, what do? Looks like the only way to is to go back to the books of fiqh with their strict conditions. No one will be speaking. Anyone who wants to speak has to call the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia or Pakistan. Yeah, so what can we do? It's a difficult issue. It's a shame. And it would be nice if there was a body in Britain that sort of appoints people. Yeah? So a body of qualified people that appoints people. If there is a contemporary issue that arises, this body of scholars in the UK gives rulings on that issue. Otherwise, people are just in confusion all the time. This guy says this guy says this. Who's this guy? Is he qualified, unqualified? Mujtahid, muqallid, jahil, what is he? People really don't distinguish. New issues arise, voting arises. What happens? Everyone has an opinion on voting. If there was a body of Muslims, of scholars that gave fatwa here in the UK, that could be settled. And that's why life before was so much easier. You've got an issue, go to the fatwa office. It's there. Go to this scholar. He's the mufti of the time. In Hajj, no one gives fatwa except Ata ibn Abi Rabah, as is a common statement. La yufti fil Hajj illa Ata. No one gives fatwa in Hajj except Ata. You want a fatwa, go to Ata. Problem solved. But now, it's not such an easy task. I'll read the Arabic of what you just said. It's correctly translated. Yeah. So the translation is correct on the issue. But like I said, it has to be understood with what I said. To say following madhab is haram, if it's to be understood in its apparent meaning, then no doubt it's opposes the majority of scholars. Because I've just said it's the four madhahib. All of them agree that following a madhab is permissible. And if the four madhahib isn't the majority, then who's left? Yeah. So the vast majority of scholars say that following one of these four madhahib is permissible. But not wajib. Not wajib, but permissible. Yeah.
So does the sheikh mean basically if I went and picked up like Aqsa,
these are the issues.
Did it myself without anyone else knowing? Is that
Here are the issues. Student loan, okay. Let's take Zahed al-Mustaqna. Look at the conditions of a loan. Oh, I don't see anything here. Permissible. Okay. So there an issue might arise, especially on these contemporary issues. Taking the books is a problem. Because here, what does he say in the third paragraph? He says, in the second paragraph, he says, therefore it is an obligation for him to ask one of the available muftis. What if all the available muftis are Hanafis? Is that permissible? Of course. I live in Leicester, right next to Dar al-Ifta. All Hanafi. Masjid here Hanafi, masjid here Hanafi, masjid there, all Hanafis. I'm asking an available mufti. All of them are Hanafi. Can I go with their opinion every time? According to the author's words. Yes, because it's an available mufti. So just because they're coincidentally Hanafi, do I have to say, oh, I've done too much Hanafi now, I need to go elsewhere? No. You can follow these scholars even if they're from the same madhab. So, like I said, this paragraph is to be understood to be referring to the books. Taking it from books. Because he doesn't know the statements or terminology of the madhab. This is a human being here in front of me. I'm asking him for a fatwa. So when he's giving me an answer, he's giving me an answer that I understand. So the issue of statements and terminology doesn't apply. Where does it apply? Books. Applies when it comes to books. Doesn't apply to a human being giving you a fatwa. Yeah, so this issue here has to be understood correctly. Because now imagine somebody picking this up. The majority of scholars argue it's impermissible to do so because, or the majority of scholars say that it's impermissible to do so, following the madhab. So what's this rubbish that we've been studying all the time, that you can follow a madhab and so on? And he's saying, that it's impermissible. In fact, from the beginning of the text, I've been saying you can follow the form of madhab, you can. Then we get to this page. Hold on. What have you been teaching us? So this is important to know, and that's why I spent some time on it, because otherwise it will be misunderstood, and the rest of what I say will just be ignored. Okay. Anyways, is there an issue on this page? Can we move on?
Alhamdulillah wa sallallahu wa sallam ala rasulillah amma ba'd. Just a quick note on the class yesterday on the text of Usul Al-Fiqh by Sheikh Sa'd Al-Shithri, hafidhahullah. Just in case it was, mistakenly said by me, that when we got to the chapter of following a madhab, we spoke about it yesterday, and we said the first paragraph, if I recall correctly, I must have said right next to the Shaykh's statement, rather the majority opinion is that following a madhab is permissible. Then I corrected it later and said, rather, right next to it, rather, this is referring to the books. It's referring to the books. And the majority of scholars say it's permissible to follow a madhab. So it's not a case of I'm saying, la, the Shaykh is, is to be corrected in that point. That's not what my point was. And it's not something that I would do, hopefully. Okay, so it's not a case of you right next to that statement, no, in fact, this is a mistake. The majority say you can follow a madhab. No. You right next to it, i.e. following a madhab from the books, i.e. following a madhab from the books. And the majority of scholars, if not a consensus, the 4 imams, definitely, say that following a madhab is permissible. So this was the first point. Then there was the second point of these books of fiqh are made not for acting upon, but they're made for learning. And this, I didn't find another tafsir, I couldn't find another explanation for it. And it seems like the Shaykh does think that the books aren't there to be acted upon, nor given fatwa upon, nor to be used in by judges. And I took this from another statement of his elsewhere. So, like I said, if his opinion is absolutely that, which I doubt, then that's his position, and the majority of scholars are on a different opinion, and they hold the opinion that these books are there for acting upon and giving fatwa from, and for qada as well. And that's the opinion of the 4 imams. The 4 imams, the 4 madhahib are upon that. But like I said yesterday, most likely he's again referring to acting upon it as a whole, just like that, even on issues that require more guidance. And it won't suffice a layman to just act upon these books by themselves, but instead they need to be acted upon with some guidance. So these books are to be acted upon, but there are many times where some guidance is needed, and it's not so easy to just act upon them from beginning till end just like that. So that was just to clarify yesterday's point. It wasn't a case of cross out or correct what the author is saying. No, what he's saying is referring to following madhab from the books. And the majority of scholars, and I'm sure the Shaykh is from them also, is that following madhab is permissible. It's permissible. And as for the second part, that the books of fiqh aren't there for acting upon, then again that refers to completely acting upon by a layman without being guided by a teacher. As for if you're guided by a teacher who tells you, yeah, this is how you do this is how you do that, then and based on this book, there's no problem at all. There's no problem at all. In fact, our teachers encourage it. And they say, when we're learning the Hanbali madhab, we're not learning it just for the sake of it, we're learning it to act upon it. And so he encourages us to act upon the Hanbali madhab, because this is, more worthy of being followed than the opinion of someone who came 500 or 1,000 years after Imam Ahmad rahimahullah. So that was another point to keep in mind. And remember, we said that it's the clear evidence that he's referring to books of fiqh and not scholars of fiqh and not the madhahib, is that he had a problem with terminology. And so terminology, a layman will only have terminology if he takes it from the books. He won't have a problem if he's speaking to a scholar who he can ask and can clarify from and so on. Yeah. So there's no doubt that this is all to do with taking it from books only, without the guidance of a mufti or a teacher when it comes to acting upon it. Wallahu a'lam, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.
Okay. Does a Muslim have to ask for the verdict again in the case that the incident occurs? There are two opinions. The second one, it is not an obligation to ask again. And also, if we said it's an obligation, we'll be asking questions forever. So, this second opinion really is the one acted upon by the scholars today. That if an issue arises again, khalas, I don't need to ask again. Do I have to pay zakat on my jewelry? The scholar says no, you don't have to pay zakat. Next year comes by, zakat time again. Shall I ask again? No, you've asked already. So, yes.
In terms of contemporary issues, can someone just follow like European Council for Fettahs and just keep to their reason for the time?
They can do.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yes.
Yeah, they can do. Because it's a large group of them. And one of the biggest shames in our time is that we have paid little attention to translating the fatwa of the big fatwa councils, fiqh councils. There are some seriously major scholars in the fiqh councils from all across the world, from all the various madhab. And at home I have a text that is about 4 volumes that contains the fatwa of very summarized rulings on contemporary issues of these councils. These councils consist of giants. The Grand Mufti in Saudi Arabia, Mufti Taqi in Pakistan, scholars in Qatar, Kuwait, in Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia. All these scholars are in these councils. Come together and they discuss issues over time and again and again and again, and then come to a collective fatwa. These should be taken care of. We're following the fatwa of the masjid of the imams, the imam of a masjid, and we're leaving these because they haven't been translated, unfortunately, and they haven't been widespread. People aren't aware of them. So that's something that we ought to work on. Let's quickly go through this chapter and then we'll end it there. What are the ahkam of sharia found in fatwa of scholars? Here are some terminologies that can be benefited from. Wajib means obligatory. Mandub means recommended on the next page. And that means, it's also called sunnah, mustahab, nafil, etc. Haram, prohibited. Makruh is disliked. And mubah is permissible. Of course, if you do something haram, you're sinful. And if you don't, you are rewarded intentionally. If you intentionally didn't do it. Yeah? Are we now rewarded here for not drinking alcohol? No one here is drinking alcohol right now. Are we rewarded for that because we're leaving a sin? The answer is no. Yeah, the answer is no. Otherwise we'd be piling on rewards day and night. Because no one can be doing so many sins at the same time. In fact, even whilst committing a sin, we'd be piling on good deeds. Because if I'm drinking alcohol, then I'm not killing anyone. So this is important. When it says not committing when you leave a sin, you're rewarded, it means with intention. Someone offers me alcohol, and I abstain. I see money that I can take, and I abstain. That's what we're talking about. Something makruh, if you shouldn't do. But if you do it, it's not a sin. Okay? Something that's a sunnah, if you do it, you are rewarded. If you leave it, are you sinful? No. Next, a shart, which is a condition. A condition always comes before. Yeah? So a condition of salah is wudu, for example. Al-mani', a hindrance. Al-mani' is something like clothes, like the author says. Impurity of clothes is a mani'. It's a hindrance. It's a hindrance to the validity of my prayer. Something is preventing my prayer to be valid, like a woman's menstruating. That's preventing her prayer to be valid. Okay. As-sahih, which is something valid, whether it's a marriage, whether it's a sale, whether it's a prayer, whether it's a fast. Al-fasid, which is invalid. So if someone gets married, but the woman has no wali, what's this marriage called? Fasid, invalid. Unless they're making taqleed of the Hanafi madhab. Yeah? Someone marries without witnesses, the marriage is fasid or batil. And there's a slight difference in the books of Usul between those two terms. Al-ada, which means performing the action in its time, like praying on time. Qada is praying it after time. And i'ada is repeating an action. So, for example, I pray salah. I'm a Hanafi. I pray according to the earlier time. I pray Asr according to the earlier time. But then I say, you know what? Just to be on the safe side, I'm going to pray again, just in case, because according to the Hanafi madhab, time wasn't in yet. Yeah. Or I shouldn't have prayed at that time. And there's a difference between the Hanafis on that issue. The various readings of the Quran, this part we can skip because all it's saying is all valid, authentic recitations can be recited within Salah. That's it. And we only really have to be aware. There's a bit benefit to it sometimes with rulings as well. The scholars sometimes, different recitations can give different rulings at times. And it just means that when someone's reciting Quran with a certain wording, then that's fine. It's valid. We don't have to correct them because it's a valid recitation. Also, a hadith come in various narrations sometimes. How many times does a khatib mention a hadith and you sit there thinking, I've read this hadith before, you've made a mistake? Not necessarily. There are so many various narrations. And sometimes if you look at Sahih Muslim, you'll find 20 different variations of a hadith. 15, 10 variations of one hadith. Different wordings in different books. So we need to be careful again with that. Not to rush into correcting when we're not sure. The actions of the Prophet ﷺ. Number one, something that's specific to him, like marrying more than 4. Number 2, things that are natural and innate, like him eating certain foods and drinking. We're on page 47. Yeah, like him eating or drinking and doing other things that are natural, like sleeping and so on. These, of course, are standard practices. And he also says, as an example, on the 4th line, for example, wearing a turban. And a group of scholars, including Shaykh Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, recommended that you don't oppose the dress code of your community. You don't oppose the dress code of the community. Unless there's a good reason. So, for example, now the thobes that we have, I think there's a good reason to oppose the dress code of the community. If a person wished to. We wouldn't say to someone wearing a thobe, why are you opposing the dress code of the community? Maybe he says it's more covering. Yeah? It's more covering for the awrah. Or, I'm in a community where the thobe is the norm. Like Birmingham. Yeah. Alhamdulillah. Especially certain areas, someone is a Small Heath, or Island Rock, or Moseley, or Spark Hill. There's no way you're opposing anyone here. And so there's no issue there. But if someone was to attend a conference which consisted of only non-Muslims, then maybe it could be said that it's good for you to not oppose people, not attract attention, and so on. So there are times where dress code can change. Let's quickly finish this. Number 3, actions that are considered acts of worship.
Could I ask a question?
This type, yes.
So just on this point, things that aren't necessarily part of the Sharia, but like I know, like Abdullah he would even try and step.
That's not given the ruling of mustahab, but that intention you're rewarded for, your love for the Prophet ﷺ and your desiring of following him in every way. Like Ibn Umar would lower his head, just like the Prophet ﷺ used to lower his head when he passed by a certain tree. that tree no longer was there, Ibn Umar still lowered his head. So when they asked him, so the Prophet ﷺ used to lower his head when he passed by this tree. That tree is no longer there, but I want to follow him in his sunnah anyway. No scholar says lowering your head at that spot is a sunnah. No scholar says that. But Ibn Umar and anyone else who was to do a similar thing is rewarded for that intention. Yeah? So there's a difference between you as a person and you're being rewarded for your intention, and between that action in itself. We're not going to say the action is a sunnah. It's not. Yeah? It's not given the ruling of mustahab. Finally, actions that are acts of worship that aren't specific to him, these are all legislated for the Muslim. They are legislated for the Muslim. And the madhab of Imam Ahmad is that they are wajib. If there is nothing, of course, this applies to the mujtahid. This is the mujtahid who's going to look at the various actions of the Prophet and derive a ruling. But the Hanbali madhab is that if the Prophet does an action that is an act of worship, and there's nothing to prove that it's obligatory or not obligatory and so on, then it's wajib. That's the madhab of Ahmad. And many scholars say it is recommended, not wajib, like the author. There's not too long left. Shall we finish the text? 10 minutes or so. We'll complete it.
Next issue, big issue.
No, we want you to dwell on it. We have good people in the gathering. So shall we finish or next week?
I'm free.
Who cannot do more than 10 minutes? You can't do more than 10 minutes. You can't do more than 10 minutes. It's not haram or makruh. It's normal. طيب. We'll quickly go through then. Because this is an easy read, alhamdulillah. Anyone can read this. But there are some points that do require explanation. Like I said, like the earlier point of, it's haram to follow the madhahib. Yeah, so there are points that do require an explanation, others don't. A Muslim issuing a fatwa, page 49. The scholars are agreed that the one who's not a mujtahid, it is haram for him to pass a fatwa. So the scholars are agreed that if he's not a mujtahid, it is haram for him to pass a fatwa. Even if he's right. Even if he's right. Even if he gave an opinion that is the ijma' anyway. He's sinful. He's sinful. Is it, for example, is it permissible to recite 2 surah in 1 rak'ah? Is it permissible to recite 2 surah in 1 rak'ah? Yes. By ijma'. Someone asks him, he doesn't have a clue, he says yes, permissible. There's no evidence to say it's not permissible. For example, he's sinful. He's sinful. He's given an answer that, a layman knows. But he had no knowledge of that. He had no knowledge of what Allah's sharia is regarding that. And he gives an answer without being qualified, so he's sinful, even though he's right. Even though he's right, okay? So that's a point to know. The last paragraph of the page, he says, it is allowed for him to pass on the verdict of a scholar by saying that so-and-so issued a verdict in such a case with the following ruling. And I strongly advise that we don't even do this unless we are specifically asked. Because now we have a page on Facebook called the Hanbali Madhab, yeah, where the rulings of the Hanbali Madhab are posted in. At the beginning of the making of this page, until the admins became strict, you write something, a fatwa, and someone says, Shaykh Ibn Baz said this. So, this is the Hanbali Madhab page, ya akhi. It's here for this. If everyone is going to comment with a fatwa they heard, it's a problem. And the problem is people know it's haram for them to give fatwa. So they give fatwa, but they say, this scholar said this, I'm just passing it on. I'm just passing it on. I'm going to enforce it on you, but I'm just passing it on. No, that's a big, big problem. And so that's why even this we need to sort of be careful of. And how often have people passed on fatwa and passed it on completely wrong? Passed it on completely wrong. Yeah. It's because, yeah?
There's a common occurrence that happens literally every day, which is that on WhatsApp, the people are too lazy to go on Islam Q&A and look for the fatwa themselves on an old issue. So they'll just ask it on a group. and you'll just get the brother.
Someone
So
gives you the
just
link.
say, like, no, it's no, it's, they don't even-
Saving time.
They don't give the link, they just say yes or no themselves.
Yeah.
So the brother will ask the fatwa, can you pray after us or something like that?
Yeah.
And they'll say yes or no.
Yeah.
So is that something, like, because they're not qualified to say that?
Don't qualified to say yes or no.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, this goes back to the point we mentioned about the individual answering the question. If it's from him himself, no doubt it's haram. If he's got it from Islam QA and he just summarized it with yes, then
But is it enough for someone to take it off themselves
No.
by saying some scholars say this or the scholars say this without actually naming who the
The-
person is?
it is, but this sort of person is always problematic.
Yeah.
And I know these people very well. Very weak understanding of fiqh. But, come across a fatwa, I'll answer it by saying some scholars mention X, Y, Z. Alaikum salam. Yes, no problem. Okay. And the issue is, such an individual will so often pass on a minority opinion, or a weak opinion, or a shadh opinion. But it's on here, it's on Islam QA, it's on this issue, And when this person gets used to constantly answering questions, what happens is they'll move on to bigger issues and bigger issues and bigger issues. I wouldn't take an opinion from someone unless you know which scholar holds that view.
Yeah.
So the person asking shouldn't rely on anyone answering. Unless you know for sure he studied a particular madhab and his answer. Sorry? Or he's qualified. If he's qualified himself, alhamdulillah, that solves the problem.
Last one is can you answer like ridiculous questions? For example, some comes up to you and says, I prayed for Salah and then my wudu broke. Do I have to pray for it again? Like that's obviously...
You know, subhanAllah, the interesting thing is some people really are lacking knowledge.
Yeah.
So some people mean those questions.
Yeah.
I remember once a person came and said, does drinking milk invalidate my fast? If I drink milk. And I thought, there's no way he's asking this question. He must be asking something else. So I said, what? And I kept asking and trying to figure out what he means. And I couldn't. And he actually meant that. So in the end I said, no, it's no problem. You don't have to make wudu again. And I'm still waiting for him to say more because I'm thinking, there's no way he's asking this. But, he is. Some people have asked, does sweat break the wudu as well? And again, you stop and think, what? Yeah, but they actually mean that. So some people are. If you know someone's taking the mick, then the scholars explicitly state don't answer. Yeah? Explicitly state don't answer. Or someone's asking about something that doesn't concern them. The scholars explicitly state don't answer. What's the ruling on the khilafah of ISIS? What's that got to do with, you wouldn't even answer that. Is Malik Salman a Muslim or a kafir? Yeah? Wouldn't even answer these sort of questions that don't concern them.
But as in me and myself, for example, I'm not qualified to give fatwa, but if someone asked me a question like that and it actually meant it, could I answer it?
Passing on an answer, yes. Passing on a fatwa, yes. Passing on a fatwa, yes. Yani we have to be sure though. We have to be sure. No, I'm pretty sure. Or I heard that. We have to be certain. And this is the beauty of learning fiqh in an organized manner. I know 100% sure this is allowed because the Hanbalis say this. Or, this scholar said this, or this, etc. No, there's no issue there. So you can pass on fatwa. But again, we have to be careful from people just passing on fatwa, because many people misunderstand, many people mistranslate, many people, it's a big problem. And when I was translating Shurut al-Salah, I came across a different translation. The translation was terrible. Yeah? And it changed rulings. The translation changed ruling because the translator didn't know these rulings. He didn't understand them. And because he didn't understand them, he translated them in a different way. So, yes, sorry.
You mentioned the last week that scholars come and the laymen at conferences or whatever, they ask them very basic questions.
Yeah.
But the scholars still answer them.
Yeah.
And why, if the scholar knows that the people can get the answers from somewhere else, why would they? Why do they answer questions that are very basic?
No.
Is there a specific reason to it?
I think basic isn't something that is blameworthy. If someone asks a basic question, it's not blame. So the scholar says, and the scholars know as well. People are in a confused time. We're in a time of confusion. Someone is on one particular issue for years, not sure about it. So he thinks maybe he's been unsure about this issue. He's found this an opportunity to ask, and so I'll give him the answer. So asking a basic question is one thing, but then there are asking questions that are unnecessary or maybe cause more harm. This very often you'll find scholars won't answer them in the first place. They'll ignore them very often. And scholars have different approaches, of course. But yeah. طيب, anything else on this issue? A Muslim issuing a fatwa, like we said, it's haram for the one who's not a mujtahid to give his own fatwa. Passing on a fatwa, we need to be accurate. We have to be accurate. Yeah. It is allowed, but we have to be accurate. If we know that this is the scenario, this is the fatwa, etc.
This opinion is, there's no dispute.
I don't know of a difference of opinion.
Because I do spread it quite a lot.
Sorry?
I do spread this opinion.
No. The vast majority are on it, of this opinion, and I don't know if anyone opposed on this issue, that it's permissible to pass on a fatwa. And I've got a book at home which covers fatwa. It's called Nahj al-Aqwa fi Arkan al-Fatwa. It talks about fatwa and everything related to fatwa. And he mentions this issue. So if I come across a difference of opinion on it, I'll mention it in the group, inshallah. Types of wajib. An obligation is that's restricted to its time, such as the time of fasting. You have to fast at that time. And then there's an obligation that's not restricted, such as the time for dhuhr. You can fast at the beginning of, you can pray at the beginning of dhuhr, or the middle, or the end. He mentions a couple of rulings. It's permissible for the person to delay performing an obligation that isn't restricted by time. That's obvious. When the time is remaining is just long enough to perform the action. There's 5 minutes left till sunrise. Now praying Fajr is wajib. There's half an hour left till sunrise. Do you have to pray Fajr right now? Don't have to. Shouldn't be delaying it that long, but it's not quite an obligation. That's all it means. Okay. Next page, 53. Who is requested with a collective obligation? The last paragraph, the collective obligations are a request from everybody who is suitable to carry it out. So it is a collective responsibility. Turnover, the demand and sin for not carrying it out is dropped from every person if he believes that it has been fulfilled by somebody else. So if you are able to fulfill a fard kifaya, which is a obligation that is a collective obligation, then you are one of those who are required to do it. If you know that someone else is carrying it out, that's it. So now, for example, someone in this community here has passed away. We, being in the community, are from those requested to pray janazah on him. But I know for sure someone else is going to pray janazah on him, that's it. It's not obligatory for me to do it. If nobody does it, all of us are sinful. But the one in London isn't sinful, because he isn't from those who are requested with it in the first place, because he's far and unaware, etc., etc. Interrupting an action before its completion. This was the issue I spoke about earlier. I've started my prayer, can I break it? The Hanafis and Malikis say, someone has started praying Tahiyyat al-Masjid. This happens a lot, and the Iqamah is made. Can you cut this prayer? The Hanafis and Malikis say it is haram to cut the prayer. The rest of them, Shafi'i and Ahmed, say it is makruh. So it's not recommended, as some people think, to cut the prayer, even if the Iqamah has started. And Allah says in the Quran, وَلَا تُبْطِلُوا أَعْمَالَكُمْ. Don't invalidate your actions. Don't invalidate your good deeds. And so what do you do in this case of prayer? You can, like we said in the Hanbali madhab, you can break the prayer, but it's makruh without a good reason. So what should you do? Just keep this prayer short. Do the bare minimum, keep it short, and then join the jama'ah. Very, very rarely will you miss even one rak'ah from doing that. Very rarely. So there's no way you're going to miss the whole salah, let alone let alone the whole salah, if you're not going to miss one rak'ah. If you're fasting and someone invites you to a wedding, can you break your fast? The answer is yes. Yeah. We'll go with the Hanbali method. That's how these circles are Hanbalis. So you can, but do you have to? No. Is it recommended for you? If the scholars say, if it will upset the person. You've come here, you're not eating, and so on. Then it's good to break your fast. If not, there's no issue. Then like today's weddings are massive. No one's focusing on whether you're eating or not. Come, carry on fasting. Just sit down with the brothers, give him salam, congratulations, and off you go. And that's it. There's no issue there. But you can. Yeah. I'm fasting. Someone invites me to a barbecue. He says, come along. Okay, I'll come along and I'll break my fast. Salam. No problem. Okay, are non-Muslims commanded with furu'? What's furu'? Huh? Branches, which means today it's known as. What's the opposite of furu'? Huh? Usul. The opposite of furu' is usul. Usul, when they say usul, they mean agreed upon beliefs. Like belief in Allah and the angels and the final day, and these are usul. These are usul. Furu' is like actions of prayer and so on, etc. Yeah? That's the difference. So, are non-Muslims commanded with furu'? This discussion really isn't that necessary, because if a non-Muslim, they're saying basically, will a non-Muslim get punished if he doesn't pray and pay zakah? That's what the discussion is. On the Day of Judgment, will they be punished for not paying zakah? Some scholars say no, he's not a Muslim in the first place, so why would he be? And the author says they will. The author says he will be punished, and that's what what most scholars say.
Doesn't this also apply, for example, if I accidentally bought something that's got gelatin in it, I'm not allowed to now give it to a non-Muslim?
Oh, that's a slight difference, but that can be built upon that, and the author mentions that. Yeah, the author mentions. So he says here, he said, I'll speak about the benefits of this issue, and so one of them is, will the disbelievers be the disbelievers in the Akhirah will be punished for their disbelief? Will they also be punished for missing prayer and so on? These scholars say yes. Why? Because Allah says in the Quran, قالوا ما سلككم في سقر. What has caused you to be in the hellfire? قالوا لم نكن من المصلين. We never used to pray. ولم نكن نطعم المسكين. We never used to feed the poor. وكنا نخوض مع الخائضين. وكنا نكذب and so on. So they say therefore they're being punished for these things as well.
What the principle of la dhanba ba'da al-kufr?
Sorry?
There's a principle la dhanba ba'da al-kufr. There's no.
That means there is no sin worthy of mention after disbelief. Right? There's disbelief, and so if you're disbelieving, then what comes after disbelief isn't really a big deal. So that's a principle, that Allahu A'lam where it comes from. I don't know. It doesn't make it in evidences. The majority of scholars are opposing. But anyways, it's not. As some of the scholars say, this issue is not even beneficial. Some scholars have gone to that extent to say that this issue isn't that beneficial because it's referring to the next life. As for this issue here of giving someone something that's haram. Okay, I can't drink alcohol, but someone's given me alcohol as a gift. Can I give it to the neighbor or not? Most scholars, even though they say the disbelievers are punished, say you can't. You can't. So not necessarily that this issue is built upon on this one. Because they'll say, no, they might not be held to account, but you are for helping them. Yeah? And so there's still a slight difference. Yeah, sorry.
No, it's with regards to the same.
Okay. Yeah.
It's kind of a follow-on from Rafi's question, where ta'muruna bil ma'ruf tanhana 'anil munkar. Is that also for non-Muslims? So, for example, especially us now, we work a lot with non-Muslims. Should we be trying to instill, even if it's nothing to do with aqeedah at all, instill Islamic values like, we shouldn't really lie, or does it? It's not really matter.
No doubt.
Even with non-Muslims.
No doubt. And in fact, one of the things that caused people to enter Islam is they saw how the Prophet ﷺ was truthful. They saw how the Prophet ﷺ was in his manners. They saw how the Prophet ﷺ used to give to the poor and so on. And so, no doubt, especially in the time that we're in. Especially in the time that we're in. Most likely, manners and character will do people, or will convince people far more than discussions and debates. Is it permissible for a Muslim who's not a scholar to give tafsir of the Quran? The summarized answer is no. And he mentioned the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, whoever speaks about the book of Allah without knowledge, then let him take his seat in the fire. And this is especially for those who know translations of the Quran, and they think that this translation suffices as a tafsir. It's not a tafsir. How many times is the tafsir of a verse the opposite of the translation? And it's also applicable to Arabs especially. They think because they know some Arabic, they can make tafsir. No. Arabic is not, knowing some Arabic is not tafsir. Tafsir sometimes is, so much comes from just one verse, and so we need to be careful with tafsir. Is it permissible to relate a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ by meaning? I don't remember the exact statement of the Prophet ﷺ, but I know that this was the meaning. If we're certain that this is the meaning, then most scholars allow it. Most scholars allow it. And if we didn't allow it, there would be a problem, of course, because no one would mention any hadith unless they were 100% spot on in the memorizing of that hadith. So we can relate a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ with their meaning, so long as we are 100% sure that that's what the intended meaning is.
Paraphrasing.
Yeah, paraphrasing it. Paraphrasing the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. This was what happened. Okay, this is what the Prophet ﷺ said. Paraphrasing it, so long as we're sure that this is the intended meaning of the hadith. Finally, what principles does a Muslim need to know? Actions are by intentions. We covered this in Sharh al-Arba'in. B, avoiding difference of opinion is recommended. And this is what we mentioned earlier. Yeah, avoiding difference of opinion is recommended. I'm invited to this guy's wedding and I'm fasting. I know the Hanafis and Malikis don't allow me to break. And Ahmad and Shafi'i allow me to break my fast. There's no problem in keeping my fast. It won't upset anyone, so let me just keep my fast. This way I'm avoiding what? The difference of opinion as a whole. I don't need to even go into it and think, okay, who holds this view? No. Avoid it altogether, if we can. Finally, no rebuke in issues of ijtihad. And, there are so many principles that we've covered in this book. If people stuck to, so many problems would be fixed. One of those important principles is this one.
So with regards to avoiding difference of opinion, for example, in combining, say you go to London, and it's okay for you to combine, but the brothers are not combining there. Or I remember actually there was one time we went to London for a conference, and the sheikh actually got angry that we wanted to combine. So that's an issue where you would, avoid the difference basically by not combining.
Yes, yeah. So here you're definitely avoiding difference of opinion, because most scholars, those who say combining is permissible, say it's disliked for no good reason, or it is mubah. It's not mustahab. Big difference between shortening the prayer and combining. Shortening is a sunnah, to the extent that some scholars said shortening is wajib, whereas combining is either haram according to the Hanafis or not necessarily recommended. So here we're avoiding it, especially if there is a senior or elder there who has said, no guys, we're not combining. Here you don't say no, the majority of opinion, of scholars' opinion, and so on. This is the principle that applies. Finally, no rebuking issues of ijtihad. Where there's issues of ijtihad, valid ijtihad, there is no rebuke. Person doesn't criticize others on issues of ijtihad. This is a very important principle. He's doing something following a valid ijtihad of a scholar, so leave him alone. Don't make a problem out of these things, especially here in the time that we're living in. As some of the scholars said, they said, my advice to the Muslims in the West is focus on the 5 pillars of Islam, and focus on the 6 pillars of Iman, and focus on avoiding major sins. And that is it. If you've done that, you're successful. If we've done that, you're successful. Imagine a community where major sins are avoided, the 5 pillars are fulfilled, and the Iman, belief, is sound. What better you won't find a community like that. So how in the world are we focusing on issues where the scholars disagreed on? Nothing to do with wajib and haram sometimes. Sometimes, is it a sunnah or not a sunnah? Is it makruh or is it allowed? Sometimes nothing to do with wajib or haram anyway. And people make a big fuss out of it. It's a big problem. So we have to try to, set these standards in the community. And the more people see this being done, the more people will follow. Especially if we're considered influential people in our circles. We need to do this. We need to be clear that, look, issues of ijtihad, don't make a big deal. We're in a time where Muslims don't know, the difference between iman and kufr. And you're going to debate with me on issues that are furu', that are difference of opinion between scholars. It's very, very unwise.
There's another principle that they quote is the same, but instead of saying ijtihad, they say khilaf. So is that
slight difference, because khilaf can be by anyone. And there's no rebuking on issues of khilaf. Maybe the khilaf can be invalid. Because some people take advantage of this principle. They say, Ya akhi, why are you rebuking in issues of khilaf? Some scholars said mut'ah is halal. The mut'ah that the Shia have is allowed. Or anal sex is halal. Why are you rebuking on issues? No, the Ummah has agreed that these are now invalid opinions. Even if people claimed that there were some who held this opinion in the early times, even if these were claims, I'm not even saying these are valid claims. They might be. They were claims. So people want to take advantage. These aren't issues of ijtihad. Mut'ah and so on aren't issues of ijtihad. These are issues of ijma'. Yeah, ijma'. So, that's why there's possibly a slight difference. Some people use khilaf as a word, and they mean by it ijtihad of the scholars. But we need to be careful of this issue. Not every difference is valid. What we know for sure is a valid difference is a difference of the form of madhahib, because the ummah has agreed on that.
So you wouldn't be in terms of ijtihad as well, would you not be allowed to rebuke someone who follows a distinct opinion? So it's not an opinion that's
Like what?
Like it's very rare.
Like what?
Like Ibn Hazm and music.
Sorry?
The very rare opinion that you can break the fast when the sunset goes.
That opposes the four madhahib, and so it's an issue. It's an issue. You'll know it by the way the scholars deal with it.
Yeah.
You know the way the scholars do. If the scholars consider it a valid difference of khilaf, all across the board, then it's acceptable. If the scholars, don't consider it a valid khilaf, then again, and generally speaking, if the four imams are opposed, and the scholars of tahqiq like Ibn Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah and An-Nawawi and Ibn Abd al-Barr, all of them are on one side, and the four madhahib, where are you going? There's no. Contemporary issues are difficult. These are, sometimes these issues can be tough, but principle to end with for us: matters of ijma', matters that are clear, command good, forbid evil, teach, advise, speak about, and so on. Matters of khilaf, it's important to not make a big deal. Teach, explain to people. This is what the scholars say. This no issue, but forcing, no. Allahu a'lam, sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi. We took a little bit long, but it then at least means we get through the whole text. Apologies, we took a bit longer than we intended.
What about the next book? Or
I will see about. We'll see about.
Sid.